Welcome back to the PFF NFL show, here for a In the Trenches episode for Week 5 in the NFL. I'm Trevor Sikkema. That is Ollie Connolly from the Read Optional Substack, the Read Optional Podcast, and a bunch of other places where he's making you a smart football player. Today we are talking about some trench play. We're going to talk about Travon Walker's career day for the Jacksonville Jaguars. We're going to talk about the Washington Commanders O-line, because Jaden Daniels getting a lot of love, understandably so, in Washington. But the O-line, we got to talk about the O-line a little bit as well. It was a unit that we weren't so sure was going to be good enough for them, and it seems like they are at least a fourth of the way through the season. And then we're going to talk about the Seattle Seahawks. You know, they lost to the New York Giants this week. It's a tough defensive line that they were going up against with the Giants, but there's some issues along that O-line that it's not just independent from Week 5. It's kind of a season-long thing. So we're going to talk about what's not working with the Seattle Seahawks offensive line and maybe where it could get better as the year goes on. Ollie, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. What an absolutely chaotic week. So much fun to go through last week. So much fun to dig into the line play. Some of the matchups we've got coming up are really fascinating. So I'm doing great. Just having a fun time digging through these guys.
It is so funny, right? Week 4 comes around and we say to ourselves, okay, we've now got a 4-game sample size. We know who these teams are. We've seen enough already. And we make our predictions, you know, I know that at PFF we have a big, like pick 'em pool against the spread. And so it's like, okay, I think to myself, I'm more confident than I have been all week, or all year, I should say, going into Week 5. And I'm not going to lie, Week 5 was probably my worst week of the entire pick'em week. So you never know what's going to happen in this league. But I want to start with Jacksonville because they finally get a win. Congrats to the Jags. Trevor Lawrence's birthday. They were wearing the throwback jerseys. I mean, it was basically, they could have been playing, like the Chiefs at their peak, and I feel like they would have won this game. There was just too much going against them, too many good vibes for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And one of the good vibes, or at least the guy who felt it, was Travon Walker, their former number 1 overall pick, who feels like he's been under a lot of scrutiny really since he was picked, right? Especially because, him, Aiden Hutchinson, there was that debate there. Kayvon Thibodeaux was in that class as well. They go with they go with Travon Walker at number 1, and Hutchinson certainly to this point in time, even before this year began, was giving much greater return on investment. Now he had a really hot start to the year as well. So it just makes that Travon Walker pick like, the Jags sure could use a guy like that right now. And they were hoping that Walker could be that player. He was, or maybe not in the way that Hutchinson is, but he was incredibly impactful to a career-high level that we had against the Colts in Week 5. 90.4 overall grade. That was the single-game career high for Travon Walker. 7 pressures, also a single-game career high for him. Had an 84.2 pass rush grade, which is the second highest of his career. And then he had an 18.4 pass rush win percentage, which was the 4th highest of his career. So no matter how you slice it, this guy was getting into the backfield and creating havoc at a higher level than he had at this point of his career. So Ollie, when you went back and you watched Travon Walker's day, is this something where you think that this is really repeatable? Was it maybe just a matchup that he was going up against the Colts offensive lineman? Is he progressing to a level where we can expect top-tier play from him moving forward? What's your overall thoughts on how Travon Walker played this week?
Yeah, I thought he played really well. And the number one thing that jumps out of Walker every time you put the film on is just the effort. He really does bring it every single down. He's playing so much. I think only TJ Watt has played more snaps than him as an edge defender this year. So even when you get to like the 4th quarter, he is still motoring and driving off the ball at a really impressive level. So that's just kind of one thing. And we are at this point now where it's just kind of like a sunk cost thing to expect him to be Aiden Hutchinson or a top tier, top 10, top 12 pass rusher. I just think we're almost beyond that point. Can he have seasons and games where he can take over and be really impactful? And can he have a year where he gets 12, 13, 14 sacks? I think there's a plausible path to that. But him being like a dictate the terms of the game to the offense type pass rusher, I think we're just beyond that. But what's really interesting with him this season is the Jags defensively, and it's no shot at Ryan Nielsen, who has been a good defensive guy around the league. They do nothing to help their guys out. You just go through the film, the figures, whatever you want. They don't blitz. They don't sim. They don't even stunt. You would think Travon Walker, what would be the number one thing we could do with Travon Walker, right, is worst case scenario, the effort, the power. We'll dive bomb him inside one time. We'll let him go outside the other time, right? That'd be like the staple go-to. Put him in a Jets, Niners type system. Maybe he can cook and be a pressure type guy for us. They don't really do any of that either. They're like, bottom 3 in the league in almost every single category you look at of where can we get some extra juice up front. And the 3 times he did it against the Colts was when he was really disruptive swooping inside, and yet they just don't go to it. So this was a straight up like one-on-one tape. He's rushing off the left side almost the entire game.
Mm-hmm.
As you get in one-on-one true dropbacks, let's find out who this guy is. And it was a really impressive performance in terms of speed to power, setting up one style of move in the first half, then try to change it in the second half to try and throw off the tackle he was facing. So it was, with what he's asked to do, that is as high and as strong as a performance that I think you can expect from him.
Yeah, I like that you pointed out that it feels like they need to be more creative along the defensive line, because I agree with you. I think it was 3 of those 7 pressures came from him being the looper on a crash, where he was coming from the outside and he was going on the inside, and it's really tough for centers and guards to pick him up, because where you start with Travon Walker, and this is where you started with the scouting report as well, I just think that he does it, at a more consistent level, is the speed to power stuff. I mean, the dude is, all Trent Baalke jokes aside with like, oh, he only drafts athletes, whatever, never really actually looks at the tape. He just goes to the combine results. But Travon Walker, the speed to power that this guy has and the explosiveness that he has at his size, it is rare. He is built like a player that you would draft number 1 overall. So that part, like, again, all jokes aside, you get it. Like, you can understand what their thinking was here. And a lot of his pressures in this game came from he just has this unstoppable speed to power, explosiveness, and strength. I mean, it is so imposing. There's so few offensive tackles in the NFL that can really stop it. You can get some guys that might be really great at an anchor technique and might have their hands in really great positions to be able to use natural leverage to maybe slow him down enough or stop him, but truly stop him, I think the list is very, very small, single digits. Maybe you can even count it on one hand. And so this past week, I thought was just a great example of him continuing to use his strength of that speed to power and kind of impose his will throughout the entire game. I will say this, when I watched Walker, and I think that it's worth praising, and I think that he did a great job. But I was kind of thinking to myself, okay, where do we go from here? Where do we go from, all right, you had a good game. How do we get more of this out of you? Is it a situation where we put you in a similar spot to like what the Lions do with Hutchinson, right? Where we talked about that, where Hutchinson, kind of aligned as a wide 7. You've got a 3 technique defensive tackle to his side to allocate both the center and the guard. You've got now the offensive tackle on an island, and he's got to try to go out and get Hutchinson. And if he oversets, he's going to hit him with the inside spin. And if he doesn't get to the edge, well, Hutchinson's just going to be able to 2-hand swipe or club rip or whatever to the outside shoulder. At the end of the game, I noticed there were a couple of opportunities where Travon Walker had the ability to do that. And he could hit that nasty little crossover, sort of cross the face inside move, which could be helpful. But I don't know if they're going to ever go to that, because you do have Josh Hines-Allen on the other side, right? I mean, and he is the more productive pass rusher for you. So if you're really going to set anybody up, you're going to set up the guy who you know is going to give you a good return on investment. So for Walker, when I was watching him too, this stood out. He's not really winning with pass rush moves, right? I mean, like, there's not this arsenal of different types of swipes and move combinations where he's staying super clean, right? I think Hutchinson does a great job of that. TJ Watt does a great job of that. Laiatu Latu did such a great job of that when he was coming out of UCLA. It's just the guys never let you get clean hands on them. Their hands are always moving in a certain way where, okay, I knocked the hand away and now you're trying to recover, but okay, now I have another move for the other hand, and it's just they're sort of one step ahead with their hand fighting. Walker's not really doing that. I didn't see a ton of moves from him to say, okay, yes, that worked. Go to that. Let's set that up more often. Not that he doesn't have moves at all. But again, he won, in my opinion, off of athleticism in this past game. And it was just too imposing for what the Colts wanted to do. And to me, I don't know about you, I'm curious if you have an answer for this. Is there a certain way that you set that up? Maybe outside of just running more stunts, which you already said you kind of want to see from them, but is there a way you set up that type of a player to be more productive on a regular basis the way that he was this past weekend?
It's a tricky one because they tried this last year. They were way more multiple. They gave him plenty of opportunities. And outside of really, there was a Ravens game last year where he played really, really well. It just was not consistent enough to say, okay, like you said, let's allocate our front structure to get the most out of this play. And you could say maybe they should because it's the number 1 overall pick. But, we're comfortably into his career now, where, as you said, they got a better player on the other side. If you're going to do anything to manipulate your front, to manipulate protections, to get to one of the most advantageous matchup, it probably isn't going to be him. So it's a tricky one because it doesn't mean from last season to this year, he's not developed as a player where you could try it again, right? He's not exactly the same player frozen in amber as he was last year as he is this year. The one thing I have noticed about his game, which I think is encouraging, but is also a demerit in some senses because of the way that they're asking him to play at the moment. He's got way more nuance with how he gets the power. I get it's like the only move, it's the only way to win, it's the go-to move, but he does a really nice job now with his feet, with how he manipulates his body, with hitting some of these like hesitation steps to kind of position himself and position his rush path to get the opposing lineman to open up, and then he can just go into attack mode. And he's got really good timing now with the punch in the feet. Whereas before it was kind of all over the place, and I'll just run through a brick wall, and I'm just, bigger, faster, stronger than everyone else. So at least now there's nuance how he's getting to the move he knows he can win with. It's just not going to be, like we said, a dynamic weekly difference make with all these different moves. And the problem with how they're playing, he's regularly so tight to the formation that you'll see him come off the line. He has to kind of extend where he is off the line, right, to try and get onto this more diagonal plane we've discussed before to get to that power stuff. So he's taking multiple steps to get to his move, and the ball's out, right? So he's become more of a nuanced rusher with what he does well, how he wants to win, but it's taking so long based on alignment that it ends up like not really impacting the play a whole bunch. So it's a tricky one. Honestly, it's as simple to me as like, if they'd lost this game and it became a situation in the building, could you deal him somewhere? Could you get him to New York? Could you get him to San Francisco? He just makes way more sense to me as a rotational guy who puts in a ton of effort defending the run. And then you can just have him, as we said, be a more part of a pass rush machine than it is like, there's our one-on-one go and win guy.
Yeah, I think that was sort of my takeaway too, not to throw cold water on it, but it's hard to think that the Jags will set him up to have games like that more often. Like you said, like we just talked about here, if you're going to set somebody else, it feels like you're going to set up Hines Allen. And the expectations with him in Jacksonville, I think that if you sort of reprogram your brain and say, all right, this isn't necessarily the number one overall pick, this is just somebody who's a really good edge two for us, he's got some rare power, maybe that's just the appropriate way that you need to be looking at it. And he can give you a handful of games a year, hopefully, where he's able to have a major impact the way that he was this past week. Because if it did, going back to giving him credit, it felt like he was unblockable on those speed to power reps. I mean, he is, I think that he is so clean too at getting off the line of scrimmage with so much power. I mean, he comes from that 4-point stance a lot, right? Where he will have both hands in the ground, his head will be low, his shoulder pads will be low, and then there's not a lot of pre-snap jitters from him. Like sometimes I'll watch pass rushers at the college level, even really good ones, and honestly, sometimes this is worse than the really good ones because they know they can get away from it, or they can get away with it, and like their feet will be moving like the whole time, like before the ball is snapped, and then eventually you're probably firing off of your back foot as your first push foot. But with Walker, he's down in his stance, he's in that 4-point stance, he's looking at the football, and the second it moves, he explodes off of the front foot. And there is not a inch of wasted movement between him getting off the ball and getting into his full power. So that stuff I think has become really clean for him to say, okay, if power is how you win, let's make sure that you are as powerful as possible on every single snap. And I think he is really comfortable at being able to do that. Any other Jags defensive line or Travon Walker thoughts before we move on to the next one?
No, just on Walker, lastly, you said, we should give him some credit. We threw some cold water there on what was his career day, but you notice this with a bunch of rushes that there's different ways to play through contact, particularly with guys who get off the line as well, as you just mentioned there, where there's guys who are just so springy off the ball, right? There's guys like Hutchinson, Garrett, the real special ones who maintain all their speed and power through contact. They can just rip through people. It's like nothing was in their way. And then the really, really special next level, and some guys have the first one and the third one, right, is accelerating off contact. Can you close? And this has been a thing with the Jags forever, to the point of is something wrong with the way we're measuring all this stuff, where they are regularly really, really high in pressure rate every year? They change players, they change coordinators, they're always really high in pressure rate. They're always at the bottom end of the sack rate total. And the hope with Walker, right, is that can he be the guy who can finish for you, finish plays, we can boost the sack rate some. It was really disappointing to start the season. With him, you do see the acceleration off contact. He does not get stopped on contact, as you mentioned. The speed to power is incredible. His like ability to absorb it and then fire off it and to create this second surge of acceleration where you are back into a full sprint right away. That is not normal stuff. That is like when you said he has the body type, the profile of a number one overall pick. That's the kind of thing people are looking for. Is like there's certain plays where it takes them a beat to get back up to speed, right? Coming off the contacts of even if they win. And that's how you close. That's how you finish with him. When you start going through, as you mentioned, the brick by brick of how do you build this player out, I do think we're seeing more of it. It's just so into one box that he does this thing. And that makes him more of a guy who is like an A+ every coach wants in a pass rush group, but it's just not a guy who takes over games every single week.
By the way, I was looking it up when you were talking before. Keion White also has more snaps than Travon Walker, but Walker is third, so it doesn't take away from your point. He's on the field a ton. And like you said, the effort, the power, the length, everything, the body type, it's why you want him on the field as much as possible. So only TJ Watt and Keion White are the two players who have more snaps at the edge position than Travon Walker, who had a fantastic day, one of his best in a lot of different ways against the Indianapolis Colts. All right, I want to talk about the Washington offensive line, but before we get to that, the best part of football season, guys, it's checking out the post-game stats, right? Which wide receiver scored more than 2 touchdowns, which quarterbacks threw for more or less than 350 yards. If you think that you can tell people what's going to happen before kickoff, then you got to play Pick 6 from DraftKings, an official daily fantasy partner of the NFL. Download the Pick 6 app now and select between 2 to 6 players. Choose if they'll have more or less than a single stat, and there you go. It's that simple. For all the first-time Pick 6 players, too, you check this out. New customers, you put just $5 on your first Pick 6 set, whatever it is, again, 2 to 6 players, and you get $50 in Pick 6 credits for free. A lot of great action in the NFL coming up, and so there's a lot of different things that are happening. We mentioned, like, sometimes you could really get a beat on what's going to happen between certain players. You see certain trends. All right, they're feeding this guy a little bit more, a little bit less. In week 6, there's a handful of matchups where I know we're about to talk about the Washington's offensive line. They're in a situation where they're about to go up against the Baltimore Ravens. Some people might think, okay, let's bring down the receiving totals or the rushing totals because the Ravens got a good defense. If you think it's the other way around and you think the Commanders are still going to have a great day, boom, there you go. That's your Pick 6 set. Build it right off of that. New DraftKings Pick 6 customers can bet just $5 and get 50 in Pick 6 credits for free. Only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. If you got a gambling problem, you can call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problems with gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus and age eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. See pick6.draftkings.com/promos. I just teased it a little bit there. Washington's offensive line playing better as a group than I thought they were going into the season. I as a draft guy, I remember going through the draft. They ended up drafting Brandon Coleman in the 3rd round, and a lot of Commanders fans are like, we needed to address offensive line, specifically offensive tackle, before Brandon Coleman. Like, it needed to be with one of those other picks, like maybe the pick that they selected Johnny Newton at the top of the 2nd round. Like, go get one of those offensive tackles. Like, that's the position that they really needed, and they wanted to address it a little bit sooner. But the O-line's playing pretty well, and I think there's 2 guys in Tyler Biadasz, who they brought in free agency, and then Sam Cosmi, who they just signed to an extension, that are really kind of anchoring this this group. And I'll just throw out some stats before I get to you because I want to hear what you have to say about it. So they went up against the Cleveland Browns in Week 5. Good defensive line. Really good, talented defensive line. It's Darius Smith, Myles Garrett.
Coming off, we should say, they played the weeks before. They played the Bengals with no interior defensive lineman. Everyone was hurt. They had a dominant week. Then they played the Cardinals, the worst pass rush in the NFL. And then it's just like, okay, guys, we're getting all the smoke in our ears. We're really talented. We're doing really well. Here comes Myles Garrett down the chute.
Right. Here comes Myles Garrett and the Browns. 59.4 pass rush grade as a team. That was their lowest of the season, and it's one of the lowest marks that you'll see from the Cleveland Browns. I looked over the past 3 years, and this was basically as low as it gets for the Browns, especially in its current construction over the last 3 years. So they had basically the best day that you're possibly going to happen, or that you're going to have against the Cleveland Browns when it comes to overall grade output that they were able to have as a team as pass rushers. Washington's offensive line, they're 11th right now in total blocking grade. They're 4th in pass blocking grade. And I have another stat that I want to get to that's a little bit more niche, but I want to hear overall what your thoughts are on Washington's offensive line and how they played against Cleveland specifically this past week.
Yeah, just think they've been really impressive. It's an interesting one because I don't think when you go through player by player, you mentioned Biotis, who maybe is the one where he's playing above what you could maybe expect, particularly in terms of pass protection. But they still, to me, all of them, including rotating at left tackle, are just about the players you expect. I just think they're so airtight and well coordinated. You mentioned the top as a group, as a unit. They just don't make dumb mistakes. And they are asked to do an impossible amount by Kliff Kingsbury. And this is not a staff in Bobby Johnson, the O-line coach in Kliff Kingsbury, who have a strong reputation at all for actually boosting an offensive line, either individually or what Kingsbury does through scheme. It can end up sometimes feeling like it's somewhat of an afterthought of how you help out the O-line, for all the fun and games and the fireworks down the field and, trading off easier stuff for creativity. And so they've been throwing everything at them in the run game. They've been asked to do an awful lot in pass pro too. And I just think they've come through it so well. And they haven't had, I would say, a really, really top tier test blending talent plus scheme. It was kind of an unusual one against the Browns. The way the Browns set up was a little bit different than stuff they faced before. And obviously the talent level was superior. But the Ravens will be like the true test of, okay, is this a league average group, an above league average group? Are we nudging into this could be a good, very good group for the rest of the season? But I just think they have been so impressive in how they all work together, both in terms of smarts and intellect and picking things up. But then the number one thing is just like competitive toughness. They are just like unbelievably fun to watch. They blast people all the time. Everyone's looking for work all the time. They roll through the different tackles. Everyone's trying to help everyone out. It is just as simple as we don't make dumb mistakes. The ball is in the hands of the special player in the backfield as often as we can get it there. And as long as we don't make dumb mistakes, we're going to give him a chance to make throws.
Competitive toughness is something that you hear coaches talk a lot about. And doing scouting, I have that as a film category or just an overall evaluation category for any player that is in the trenches. Offensive tackles, interior offensive guards, centers, interior defensive linemen, edge rushers, because to play in the trenches in the game of football sucks. It is a mental battle as much as it is a physical battle. You are getting beaten up and bruised every single time the ball is snapped. I mean, you're trying to get after the quarterback with everything that you can, and the other guy's trying to stop you with everything that he can, and sometimes you'll get, double teams. Sometimes you'll rip off of one guy and you'll slam into another. And it takes mental, competitive toughness to play in the trenches, and it is such an underrated aspect, I think, of playing offensive line, and I'm glad that you brought it up there. Specifically for Washington, I'm curious to get your take on this because as I was watching them against the Browns, there were a handful of plays where I went, man, these guys pull really well. Like they're running counter a lot and just in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's a guard center counter. Sometimes it's just a guard puller. Sometimes it's a counter tray. Like they're running a lot of like pin and pull lead blocker stuff to a lot of success. Like for example, and I think the play that either caught my eye first or last, I can't remember, was that Austin Eckler run, that big Austin Eckler run that they had where both Cosmi and Biotis were pulling to that side and really cleared the way for Eckler to be able to get that space for that big run. And I went and I looked it up. So the team themselves, 77.8 run blocking grade when they call a play that involves a puller. So that's a really good grade. And then specifically, Cosmi and Biotis, both of them have higher than a 74.0 run blocking grade when one of them are the pullers for one of those plays. So these guys are really good at those puller types of plays where the offensive line's going to pin one way and then you've got somebody coming around, looping around the other side to be a little bit of a lead blocker for you and take somebody out. So that to me, I loved seeing that because that to me was it was creative, it was successful, and that's what you want to do, right? We talk about that with defensive line all the time. We just talked about it with Travon Walker. Okay, where's the stunts in the games? How are you setting these guys up for success? And then people don't often think about it from the offensive line of things. They just go, okay, the ball is hiked, just block the guy in front of you. And you can have a little bit more creativity than that. And I think Washington's offensive line is, or at least they're simply leaning into, hey, we are a really good team when we get specifically Cosmi and Biotis on the hoof into space. Let them be lead blockers. Line somebody up in between the shoulders and take them out in space so that the running back or the ball carrier, whoever it is, can get beyond you and get out there for a big gain. So specifically, I noticed what a great pulling team this is in those blocking concepts. I don't know if you noticed that as well, but that was something that really stood out to me.
Yeah, that is the big thing when I'm saying they're asked to do a lot. Like they are running every single kind of pin, pull, any kind of movement from the line that you mentioned. They are running it all. And now maybe Kliff has done this before where he unloads the bags in week 5. Everyone gets very excited. And it's like, oh, we're out of ideas by week 8. So that is slightly on my radar, as always, with Kliff. But the amount they're asked to do, they are one of the bottom teams in the league in wide zone rate. They look nothing like what has become like the meta trend of how you win. Everyone trying to get to this McVay, Shanahan, and even those guys have moved away from that stuff right from 2-3 years ago. But just in the general abstract, they don't motion a bunch. They don't run wide zone a bunch. It's all pin, pull, counter, movement. They're are they top in the league in screen rate? Maybe second in the league in screen rate. So once again, it's about getting guys out on the move. And these are not, the flat RPO screen, slip screens, pop it to a running back, pop it to a receiver, and keep it moving. These are, let's get the big guys out in space. These guys are really, really talented out in space. The left guard comes from Kansas City. Obviously, they ran a ton of screens too. So they're really maximizing the talent of these guys, which is we think they're at their best playing on the move, all of them. And we can get to that in so many different ways. I mean, they just have so many different creative ways of getting to the same presentation. Essentially, you mentioned the play they pop there. When you kind of break down the mechanics of how they get to popping the run, well, it's like the jet movement in there, and the jet is intended to widen a nickel, so he has to be in the fit so that the guy who's getting blocked by Biadic, so you got your best puller on a nickel. That's all through the movement and the motion and the pulling action. So even within the nuances of what they're running, it's not just that they're saying these guys are really impressive on the move. It's like, what can we call right now? What is the best matchup thing we can do? What can we do pre-snap to get our best player in a premium look so that he's at his best? And so it's just really impressive. But as much as the systems help them, I think the credit just goes to those guys. They are, I would say, from the teams I've studied, and I've gone through basically everyone at this point, the amount they are asked to do is not normal right now, this early in the season. The volume of different things that are being put on their plate, both running the ball, they got the RPO game too, which can be tricky, and then play action and in pass pro too. They have had everything thrown at them in terms of what the offensive staff has asked them to do. And for those guys to come through at a rate that is just not what I would have expected preseason, I thought they could be maybe league average, big issues at left tackle. The fact that hasn't been like a major concern, despite some of the weaker competition at times, it's just wildly impressive.
Yeah, when we think about play call creativity and creative offensive coordinators, creative offensive minds, we often think about route concepts, right? The route creativity, we think about the passing game. But I'm really glad that you put it the way that you did, where on that big run with Eckler, there is offensive creativity going on in how you are setting up what the defense has to do to match either how you are aligned or the pre-snap motion that you have to then get the exact blockers that you want against the type of defenders that you want. So that in and of itself is offensive creativity. And again, just is more praise onto what Kliff Kingsbury is doing. It's not just in the passing game. It's not just, what he's telling Jaden Daniels to do or the freedom that he's giving Jaden Daniels. It's also stuff like this. It's also the little stuff of trench creativity. Like that goes into offensive design. It's not always just about the passing game.
And what's really interesting with him, the details with Kliff was always the problem. The big picture philosophy, the one-off play designs was always like, yeah, this guy has the juice. This is like some really cool, interesting, different stuff. He'll pull stuff from Monmouth State. He'll go and find really unusual things and plug them into the NFL or the college game. It's like, wow, that's cool that he tried that. What was always difficult with him was just the particulars, the details of how you actually can block this thing up, what the timing of it is, who you're featuring when you're running it. That stuff is really starting to round into shape with him. And what they're running in the run game is basically pick up what Roman and Harbaugh did in San Francisco when they had Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick. Like that is the exact same playbook. It is not something I would ever have expected from them coming into the season. They don't motion at all, really, unless it's to motion to move someone in the run game to feature one of these guys pulling. So that is him really, really evolving as a coach to maximize the fact that he knows what these guys do best up front.
It's fun, man. It's creative. And it's great to see. By the way, you mentioned how often Washington runs screens. You wondered if they were top in the NFL. I'm not sure about rate. I don't have screen rate in front of me, but they have the 4th most screen plays called in the NFL. The only teams that have more are the Bears, the Chiefs, and the Dolphins. And so obviously you mentioned, some of those offensive linemen that are coming from Kansas City. They're very familiar playing that, so it makes sense to see them at the top of the list. So top five in screens, and obviously how they're setting things up there. I do want to wait. Anything else about Washington's offensive line before we moved on? Want to make sure?
No, we can move on.
Okay. All right. So,
no, actually, let's just quickly say that they are rotating the left tackle we mentioned. Cornelius Lucas played really well against Myles Garrett. And I can't quite figure out in the rotation what they're actually doing with the rotation. It's quite unusual. It's not series by series. Sometimes you see with Seattle, who we'll talk about soon, concept by concept, which is kind of an unusual thing for a pro coach to do, of like, we're going to run this, let's put this player in, as you would do with like a receiver or something. It's very unusual for teams to do that with the offensive line. With Washington, it's kind of like you get 3 plays, he gets 6 plays, he can have a series, but then he's coming back for another series and the other guy's coming in. It's unusual, but Coleman, having had some really rough early, teething problems as a rookie, has actually started to play pretty well. And then Lucas was unbelievable this past week. I did not have that at all in like my plans, my notes. I just thought, okay, they're going to try and scotch tape through that over the season until they think Coleman's ready to take all the snaps. Even the first play of the game, you may have seen Coleman didn't know the snap count, forgot to get out of his stance essentially against Myles Garrett. It's like, oh no, we're in big trouble. And this point of how tied together they are, Allegretti at left guard just throws Coleman into his pass set, into the perfect location as well, which is really unusual. And he's able to take out Myles Garrett. So they're just so in tune together that even the fact they're rolling through these guys at what would be like the most concerning position against the best pass rusher in the league, they're able to just get through it in terms of how they're all tied together.
Hey, we all need a good push from our friends, right? Sometimes to just get us in the right direction. That's why they're our good friends, right? So we see that manifesting on Washington's offensive line as well. We do want to talk about Seattle. Obviously, we brought that up at the top of the show. You teased it a little bit there. But before we get to that, reminding everybody that this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. As an adult, question for you. Did you make time to learn new things as often as you like? Or do you feel like that was something that was just lost in your childhood? Kids, they're always learning. They're always growing. But adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. We get busy. There's a lot of things that get in the way. Therapy can help you reconnect with that sense of wonder, because that back-to-school era for you and who you can become, it can come at any age. Therapy, it's a really useful tool to get a better understanding of how your mind actually works and become aware of your own patterns and behaviors and how to improve them. It's useful for everybody, not just people who are struggling with something specific. Yeah, I've been doing therapy for 1.5 years, and it's been something where, it started out as something that I needed help getting through, but now a lot of people think about therapy as like, I only go to therapy if there's something wrong. I go now, and sometimes there's things that I need to get off my chest and talk about and work through, but other times it can also, if I don't really have anything like that going on in my life, sometimes it's a really great reminder just to hear yourself say things out loud that are encouraging about where you're at, and just to remind you that you're in a great place, or that you're improving, or that you're going in the right direction. It can be very useful for that as well. It's all part of putting your best foot forward for you. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is convenient, it's flexible, it's entirely online, and it's a way for you to get therapy that is right for you. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover that curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/PFF to get 10% off your first month. It's BetterHelp, HELP.com/PFF. Seattle's offensive line. I love watching the Seattle Seahawks. I think they're a really well-coached team with Mike Macdonald. He's one of my favorite coaches already in the NFL. He certainly was the defense coordinator last year with the Baltimore Ravens. I'm still loving watching him with Seattle and how well things are going there. Independent of course, what happened in Week 5, which is they lose a home game to the Giants. And I think their offensive line is a big reason why they came up short here in this game. Now, they're going up against a defensive line that's got a lot of really great names, right? It's Brian Burns, it's Kayvon Thibodeau, it's Dexter Lawrence. But you and I have said on this very show before, especially the early weeks of the season, I would say weeks 1 through 3, we were waiting for the Giants and these big names to play up to that big type of fame and threat even. When you look at this defensive line on paper and you say to yourself, oh, it's going to be a rough day at the office. They weren't always making it a rough day at the office. Now, I think they're playing better, right? Those 3 players all had pass rush win rates above 10% this past week. So they're all playing better, specifically Thibodeau, who has been a single-digit pass rush win percentage guy for too much of the early part of his career. So those guys played well, for sure. But I do also kind of think that it was matchups that helped them, and it points out, or at least points a spotlight more on Seattle's struggling offensive line. So this is a unit that Every single player on the offensive line allowed us one pressure this past weekend. 4 out of the 7 total sacks were credited to the offensive line specifically. And then this season, their 33.8 pressure percentage is the 4th highest in the NFL. I did not think that was going to be the case before I looked them up. So Seattle's offensive line, this week against the Giants, maybe as a season outlook overall, what's going on with Seattle's offensive line and why it's maybe not as good as we thought it could have been?
Yeah, it's a concerning one. And I think part of it is just kind of big picture, how often they're throwing the ball. They're first in the league by a long way in neutral pass rate this season. 70% of the time, they're throwing the ball in neutral downs, which is just like quite baffling given the way it looked like they were going to be built to play this season. They tried to slim down the offensive line. They've got 3 guys there who weigh comfortably below the league average at their position. They want to get more movement. We just mentioned with Washington, right? Can we pull? Can we move? Can we be more of a movement type backfield and then take shots down the field based on people biting on the action of the backfield? And they haven't really been that. They've been more into just being a true drop back type offense. And it's funny because you mentioned the pressure rates and the win rates there. This could all be so much worse if Geno Smith has not played so well navigating through clutter in the pocket. Like the numbers could be like really, really, really jarring. And I think that the go-to easy, like throw under the bus answer is the right side isn't good enough. And it's really, really hard to coach trying to sinkhole in the NFL, but it's doable. A one sinkhole, you just have to accept, every year, we're not going to be perfect across 5 spots on the offensive line all season long for the most part. To have 2 sinkholes is where it becomes like we are in massive trouble as an offense. To have 2 sinkholes stood together is when it's like this whole operation is in like deep, deep distress. And then when you have Dexter Lawrence, who just decides that I am going to wreck everyone's afternoon, that's also a problem. So there's a lot that goes into it, but I think one we should come on to at least at some point is just the Charles Cross situation, who has become a really talented run blocker, and yet there are really concerning underlying things in the pass protection film for what should quite comfortably be their best player up front.
Yeah, when I thought Charles Cross, I had him as offensive tackle 1 in that class, and that was the Ike Ekwonu class. Who was the other one who was in that class? Evan Neal was also in that class, which, all right, that admittedly doesn't look great. But, it was like those 3 offensive tackles that everybody was talking about. It's like, okay, who's your offensive tackle 1 here? And I went with Charles Cross because I felt like you just can't teach that movement skills. And when you look at Cross, and I'm pulling up his numbers right now throughout his career, it is kind of funny how things have slipped or have switched a little bit for him here, because for as much as he was a great pass blocker, how quick he was off the line of scrimmage, how quick he could explode and get that first long kick slide and then the fast footwork after that to really be able to mirror pass rushers when he was at Mississippi State, he has shown signs of that. His pass rush grades have been in the 60s the first 2 years of his career, and then when it comes to run blocking, those were lower, right? You expect, okay, if we got a guy who's more athletic, he's firing off the line of scrimmage, he's going to be a better pass blocker. We're going to kind of have to work on the run game and almost just kind of deal with that because of how good of a pass blocker that he is. This year, it feels like it's flipped in a major way. Like he's fine at pass protection still. This past week wasn't his best, but then run blocking, he's got an 88.2 run blocking grade this season. So it is flipping a little bit, and I don't know. Well, have you seen something specifically from him? Because I still saw reps against the Giants where it's clear pass protection reps, and he's still getting off the line of scrimmage very quick. Like that athleticism is still there for him. It's just, I didn't think that he would become this run blocker that he is this year.
No, and I'm only harsh on Cross because I think he's got a chance to be like a really, really special one. I think he could be a top 5 tackle in the league for many, many years. He's got the physical profile. He's really intelligent. The fact that kind of the run game stuff has come alive, both as him kind of as the feature of the run game. If they're pulling him and it's like he is the point of the run right now, we're running behind Cross because we think he can blow someone out, or just what he's been able to do in more of just the more generic general, how his technique is improved on more of the traditional run concepts that we typically see. I think he's got a chance to be a top 5 tackle for years and years and years. What is peculiar, there's a great 2-play sequence in this game going from the end of the 3rd quarter to the 4th quarter where they run a same side counter run, right, where Cross wraps around. And I promise you've never seen a lineman move so quickly pulling across a formation and then just completely like obliterate someone's day. It was jarringly impressive. Then you get the very next play is true one-on-one rush, him versus Thibodeau. right? And he just gets walked back onto Geno Smith's feet again. And it's just really bizarre because, as you said, coming into the league, I mean, they just didn't run the ball at Mississippi State. They ran the ball like 20 times, like truly the whole season. It was a true air raid offense. And so we knew what the pass pro would look like, we felt, but what would happen in the run game. And as you mentioned, he's just entirely flipped now, where there's so much more upside in the run game and there's concerning things under the surface in pass protection. The big thing is just, he is just not a balanced guy anymore when he gets into his set. He is a perennial oversetter with his feet. He really is struggling with power. When you go through the pressures he's conceded this year, almost all of them, I think I charted this morning, 15, I think PFF has them at 19, 15 of them are pure power moves, bundled into one. There's different, array of power moves, but they are power moves, and they are both feet come up off the ground and drop into Geno Smith, right? So that, and when you watch it, so much of it, just his weight is not appropriately allocated. He's just way too far over his feet. He starts to narrow his feet on contact, which was never ever a concern with him. He's getting his feet crossed up a lot. This was a guy who always played with good balance, had a bit of a forward lean, but always at least kept the base. And you hope maybe if you could flatten the stance outside, you could change some stuff with the foot mechanics, that you could have more of a natural settled base to get to his anchor. He just doesn't have that anymore. He's just getting run off the line of scrimmage. Kayvon Thibodeau gets him 3 times with a single long arm power move where he ends up, stood on Geno Smith's feet. Who has Kayvon Thibodeau done that to in the NFL? We've talked about Kayvon a lot. We both like him. We think there's real upside. He's not a guy who one arm drives good left tackles into their quarterback 3 times in a game. So it's just a really, really peculiar one. So you've got this concern on the right side of the line. Your best player, your left tackle, is getting dumped onto your quarterback 3 times a game. I just don't know how you solve that.
Yeah, Cross has to play better individually. And I know Seattle fans who are watching this might be like, okay, well, you're talking about an offensive line that's got some bad injuries to it because Abraham Lucas is out, right? And then his backup even, George Fant, is out as well. So Stone Forsythe is playing at offensive tackle on the other side. And you and I were texting last night when we were kind of watching this film first. And Forsythe's just he does not have the movement skills to be a starting offensive tackle at the NFL level. I mean, he gets crossed up too easily. The outside shoulder gets attacked too easily. Brian Burns kind of just had his way with Stone Forsythe last week, and that's something that it's hard. You're down 2 offensive tackles that would have started in front of him, and that's just the injuries is the bad part of the game. But I agree with you. Cross, and his grades aren't terrible this year. I want to make sure that everybody out there knows that. But you're right. We're kind of coming to it from a side of I do agree. I think that he could be a top 5 offensive tackle in the NFL, but dealing with power has always been an issue for him, even going back to Mississippi State. Like I said, you watch him, he's a little bit lighter of an offensive tackle, even at Mississippi State, and you just said, hey, give me the movement skills. Like, give me somebody who could truly mirror in pass protection, and I will live with some of the bull rushes that he is going to lose. And I think that that's kind of still where you are. Like, he gives up 3 pressures in this past game against the New York Giants. Now, he gave up 13 pressures, according to us, against the Lions. And unfortunately, I think that the Lions were just like, yeah, we're going to go through his chest every single time. Now, I don't know. I didn't watch all 13 pressures, but I got to think that's probably what they thought, to get the 13 pressures against him. And then the Giants probably did something similar. So I just feel like it could be a little bit better for him. You mentioned he's a little bit on his toes. The weight's a little bit on his toes. He's a little bit off balance. It's not the end of the world. Like, Joe Alt's kind of the same way, right? Like, Joe Alt's sort of like a waist bender. He's somebody who has his weight up front, and that's sort of something that worried me a little bit with his time at Notre Dame. But it felt like he was at least strong enough to be able to handle some of those off-balance issues. But, something that really stood out to me, too, in this game specifically, when we were doing the review show yesterday, Dalton pointed this out. They had 58 offensive snaps against the Giants. They had 7 design runs called. 7 out of 58. 4 of the 4 carries that Geno Smith had, they're scrambles. They're not design runs. 7 carries between Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet? Like, that's not a recipe. You're asking these guys to pass protect 51 snaps out of 58? That's not the balance that you want there.
It makes no sense when, as you said, it's no knock on Stone Forsythe. Like, the down bodies, there's certain players have certain skills versus other skills. There are certain situations where you could hide and protect him more, which is just like a very clear thing to do, right? You just get someone close to him and you try and double up as often as possible to help him out whilst you're dealing with the injury situation. To get into a drop back game where you're getting beat off. You've got Brian Burns versus Stone Forsythe getting beat off the snap over and over and over again. And there's not like a really quick fix to try and help this thing out. I mean, 15 of the first 17 plays were drop back pass situations. So that is a premeditated, pre-designed, this is how we will attack, knowing we've got concerns with two major concerns at the right side. And we've got a left tackle who has had struggles this year versus power, where people know they'll just tee off on him and let's see if we can get some success there early on. And some of it, there was a couple of RPOs in there, so that can always blur the numbers, right? Because it depends how the guys read it. Gino checks some of them too, so it's hard to tell how much is planned versus Gino doing his own thing at the line of scrimmage. But it just over the course of the game, that is something, once you get through those first 17, you gather together and say, this is not how we're going to win today. And it's doubly concerning because when they try and help people out, this is the problem that they've got right now, is as much as they got like a talent issue on one side and Cross had some struggles on his side, the people they've tried to use to help them out just cannot get the job done. The tight ends have all really struggled. The backs in pass protection, we spoke about this last week, it is such a huge game changer for your offense right now. If your back can pick things up in pass protection, not effort, not willingness, not can pancake someone. Does he know where to be as people are throwing different blitzes, different designs, different fakes at them? Is he in the right spot? And Kenneth Walker's just not that guy. He is confused regularly. They allow free runners a ton. So it's not even like there's a really easy correction of, if we start then bringing more guys in, right? Let's get 6 in the protection. Let's get 7 in the protection. Well, all we're doing there is washing out the eligibles we could have for Gino, who is how we're going to win these games, I guess, is he just figures it out on his own. And suddenly we're down, multiple eligibles in the route, and we're still losing because these guys can't hold up. So that is always the really tricky trade-off of how many guys you drag back in to the formation, right, to help you in pass pro. If those guys are just losing, all you're doing is down guys trying to attack the coverage. It's a really, really difficult one. I don't know, as you said, given how effectively they've run the ball in certain situations, how their best player up front is blocking for the run this year, why that would not just be like an early staple. We got to get to this. Let's see where we're at. And we can always adjust, make them more drop back based if we need to later on.
Yeah, and I think that, game plan wise going into it, I can understand wanting to be a little bit more pass heavy, because you look at the Giants defense and you say, okay, where's the strength of this team? It's up front, right? So you say to yourself, like, hey, this is a bottom half team in the NFL when it comes to defensive backs with coverage grade and EPA per pass allowed. So when you look at the Giants defense, you can say, all right, well, we should want to attack through the air, maybe more through on the ground, because we're sort of afraid of this defensive line playing really well and really holding us. But again, 15 out of the first 17, 51 out of 58 total, you're not even giving your guys a chance. Like, you're basically letting those top tier pass rushers just tee off on your offensive line at that point, because there had to have come a point in the game where the Giants just didn't think they were going to run at all. And so it's like, all right, just get in the backfield. And so I think there'll be more balance moving forward. I think that that's something they're going to look at. But
it's just a really odd one because, I totally understand your reasoning there. And that maybe is how you would go into the game. You get through the first couple of scripts and go, well, should we make an adjustment? That's a fair and valid way to approach it. But the flip side is to say, okay, why don't we run at Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns for a quarter? Let's drain these guys.
Right.
You got Charles Cross here, Kayvon Thibodeau. That is a win every single time in the run game. And maybe the stats end up looking crappy and we stall out drives. It's not great. But by the third quarter, when we've ran these guys off the ball a bunch, then they won't be as effective when we then have to drop back and pass. Like, to me, it's just a bad way of navigating your way through a game plan. Is that makes sense? It's how you want to attack. Well, how do we want to attack it? We shoot all our shots in the first quarter, then we look around the sideline going, uh-oh, what have we done here? Or do you say we'll deliver the kill blow coming out of halftime?
Right.
That will burn these guys out, and then we'll start driving down the field. I just think it was a bad way to approach that.
That would have been a more balanced game plan, and one that I think we'll probably see from them moving forward. Again, not that I've ever been an offensive coordinator at the NFL level, but I think when they go back and they look at the same numbers that we've got here, again, 51 out of 58, only 7 design runs that they called all game. Clearly, like, this was not the script that they needed to help out their offensive line the way that it needed to. And I think that was an important part of game planning that might have been slept on a little bit here from Seattle that I think we could see some changes on in the future. Go follow all of Ollie's great work over at the Read Optional Substack, the Read Optional Podcast. He does a great job covering the entire league with John Ledyard as they really cover a lot of different things, multiple podcast episodes a week, and obviously Ollie's got some really great writing on there as well. Appreciate everybody watching and listening to this episode of In the Trenches. Before we go, I wanted to shout out the fact that If you have a PFF Plus subscription, we just released this week, so we're really excited about it. If you got a PFF Plus subscription, you can see premium stats in-game. We've got in-game stats. So on Sunday, as you're watching the football game and you see how players are playing, you go, wow, I wonder how PFF has these guys graded. You can check them out in real time. Now, what's going to happen is you'll be able to see the grades as they're released in real time, and then for, I think it's 90 minutes after the game, you will still be able to see them. We'll lock them after that because then they'll go through the full review and recheck process, and then you will get the full official grades for the grade release show on Monday. But if you have a PFF Plus subscription, you can see all the stats that we mentioned here on this show and more, and then you can even see some in-game stats as well as you are watching your favorite team. So go check it out, pff.com. Get yourself a PFF Plus subscription. I'm Trevor Sikkema. That is Ollie Connolly. Thank you guys for watching the PFF NFL show. We will see you right here, same time next week.